Hi everybody, welcome back to part 2 of this 12-part series on how to land that high-paying job. My name is Jennifer Butterfield and this is Trial by Jenna Fire. And in this episode, I'm gonna cover some tips on how to craft that outstanding resume. And the first video, if you joined us for that episode, I went over 3 goals to set and gave a little introduction to this series. And so those goals to set were identifying the title of the position you want to hold, how much money you want to be making, and how quickly you'd like to earn that salary. So welcome back to those of you who did watch that episode. And as I mentioned, we're going to be talking about resumes. And before we get into the details of formatting and templates and fonts and verbiage, I think it's really important to answer the question, A, what is a resume? B, why is it important for landing that high-paying job? And C, discussing why it's important to tailor resumes for the position a candidate is applying for. So, what is a resume? A resume is a summary and highlight showcasing a candidate's skills, education, work history, and it's taking all of these experiences that someone's had in their whole life and ideally condensing it into a written version that's usually around 1 to 3 pages. And the intended purpose is often to provide this resume or curriculum vitae to a hiring manager in the application to procure employment. And so when an application is submitted, a lot of times they will request a cover letter and a resume. And so I am personally of the opinion that keeping an updated resume and updated LinkedIn profile is something that should be done on a monthly basis. Every time I go through some enriching experience or hit a milestone in my career or educational history, I take the time to update my resume and my LinkedIn profile so that they're synced and that they're both highlighting these recent achievements. That way, when I need to present a resume on hand, I'm not scrambling to revamp the whole thing and feeling stressed and overwhelmed by that. So if you have never had a resume and are just creating one for the first time, or perhaps am sprucing up the resume that you currently have to land that high-paying job, hopefully this video will help you. Talking about the tailored resume for a specific position is really important. I was in a business communication class at St. Edward's University a couple of years ago. Shout out to Professor Campbell and my buddy Dominic, who was an alum, and he came and spoke and gave a presentation on resume building. And one of the things that he enlightened me on, and mind you, I'm a non-traditional student. I was 30 years old at the time, and most of the students that were in that class were, in their 20s, early 20s, just out of high school and obtaining their first 4-year degree. And there we were sitting, listening to this amazing presentation from Dominic, who at the time worked at Meta and had tens of thousands of LinkedIn followers. And here he's sharing his experience with how different formats and templates are specific to different industries. And I had no idea. And so it was very enlightening for me to learn about how a resume that is being used to get into the marketing field, for example, would be different in formatting and layout than perhaps a lawyer's resume. And what are those differences and why are those important? So some of the differences might be the font style, the spacing, the margins, the language that's used, the graphics. Maybe there are going to be more color on a marketing resume, and whereas a legal resume, it's just going to be black and white with the exception of the hyperlinks that are highlighted in blue. So those are just a few things to think about. And as we move into the description of the different sections and discussing further stylistic details and verbiage and things like that, keep that in mind. So each position is going to have an industry-specific template that will dictate which sections are presented where on the template. And so a great resource I like to utilize that has AI generation in terms of building out a resume is www.kickresume.com. And they actually will have the pre-formatted templates that are industry specific. So you go into the industry that you want, maybe it's medical, maybe it's accounting, etc. And you'll see a template that is familiar to hiring managers. So when that resume gets in their hand, they will see it and they will feel a sense of time and intention going into curating the specific resume for this position. So that can stand out and really make a great first impression. And that's what we want when we're wanting to land that high paying job, because this is a very competitive job market. As this video is being made, it is July of 2023, and there have been over 200,000 layoffs in the United States alone this year. So standing out's important. A candidate typically will put their contact info at the top of the resume or on the left-hand side if it is a double column, and ideally putting their phone number, email address, and a link to their LinkedIn profile on that contact line is really helpful. Depending on the industry, there may or may not be a headshot. The important thing with a headshot is to be sure that the background is a solid color, and in terms of visibility, being able to see clearly the person's face, something that looks professional. So eye contact with the camera. Typically after the contact info has been finalized, it is wise to go into clarifying the summary of skills or the statement objective. And this is third person narrative where we're describing what the candidate is currently or has been in the past and where they want to go. So here's an example of something that I've put on my resume: a skillful entrepreneur seeking a challenging, fast-paced environment as a business analyst. I've highlighted my previous experience and what I'm currently doing and where I want to go. I didn't use I statements, I didn't use my name. I kept it very objective, and so that's important to do. Be sure to use proper capitalization, grammar, and punctuation all throughout the resume. Speaking of which, let's talk a little bit about moving into the other sections. So there's work experience, education, volunteering, awards, community involvement. And I think the standard is either to highlight work experience or education next. So depending on what the position is, maybe it's a very research heavy or academic focused position, education would probably come up next. If it is something that probably requires a lot of work experience and maybe is looking to move into a senior level position, then a work experience section first would probably be ideal. I think the important thing to keep in mind when moving into the later sections beyond the summary of skills section is going to be consistency. Consistency is key. So if I'm listing 3 work experiences, I want to make sure that the company name for each experience is in the same place. So in terms of the position, so the title that I held, typically that will come right underneath the name of the company. I see a lot of times people get that confused or mixed up where On one experience, they have the title that they held as the first thing that's listed, and then on the second experience, the company name is listed. So be mindful of that as you're moving through the work experience section. It can be helpful to generate a few bullet points of actionable items that were a part of the job in terms of responsibilities and duties. It's also really beneficial to highlight numbers, data, and analytics. Research has shown that hiring managers are more likely to choose a candidate that uses real data and analysis to measure their progress or the value in terms of percentages, or half the time, or 5 times the amount. And so throwing those numbers and that data and those analytics into each of your bullet points as often as possible is a really great way to help your resume stand out. Let's talk a little bit about action verbs. Each bullet point should start off with an action verb. Whether it's saying, I strategized this, or I created this, or currently I am scaling X, right? So keeping that in mind, you want that to be consistent for each bullet point, starting off with the first verb being an action verb. And if it is a previous job that was held, then being sure that those are all in past tense and there's punctuation at the end of each of those lines. If it is a current job that I'm working, or a current role that I hold, utilizing present tense. So let's talk a little bit about education. With education, this section can be a point of either great pride or maybe not so much for some. I think many people have differing opinions about college education and how much it applies to the ability to secure a high-paying job. I want to say right now, if you do not have a college degree, do not let that be a barrier for applying for a multi-six-figure job. I think that there are plenty of people out there who are qualified, that are intelligent, who are capable of performing a job well and meeting standards of excellence without a college degree. That being said, I think it is important to highlight any certifications or trainings or licensures that you currently hold. If you have degrees, be sure to list the institution, what the field of study was, and the dates that you attended. It might be wise to also mention any honors that you were given throughout that course of your degree plan and any relevant coursework. So lastly, let's talk a little bit about volunteering, awards, and community involvement. And this is specifically, these sections specifically are the reason why I like to keep my resume updated once a month, because I have a tendency to get involved with a lot of different things throughout the course of a year, and I have a lot of fun doing it, and I really enjoy interacting with people, and I can sign up for things, do something, and then in 2 weeks completely forget that I participated in it. And so I want to be sure that I'm showcasing all of these amazing things that I'm participating in and even leading on my resume, and so I can add them in, and I like to keep my most recent ones at the top. So for example, I was the president of the accounting club when I was at St. Edward's University. I also was the president of the math club while I was at Austin Community College, and I founded the first business club called the Future Business Leaders of Austin. All of these are going to be under community involvement and volunteering. I'm sure that you have a wealth of different things that you can pull from experiences that you've had and implement them into your resume in these sections. I think highlighting just 3 to 5 things and keeping 1 or 2 of these sections at the bottom, whether your resume is 1 page or 2 pages or even 3 pages, taking the time to add a few highlights around what your life looks like outside of work and school. So just to recap, in this episode, we talked a lot about why a resume is important for landing that high-paying job, and we covered different ways to utilize templates to make them industry specific, your resume's industry specific. We discussed the different sections of a resume, like the work experience section, the summary of skills, ideal places to list contact info, and moving into education, volunteering, and awards and community involvement. And we also discussed simple stylistic things, and punctuation, grammar, and capitalization is all congruent and correct. Well, I feel really grateful that we had this opportunity to cover how to make an outstanding resume, and I highly encourage utilizing AI technology and generating tools to help you produce language that will align with the specific job description of the posting that you were applying to. The last tip I'll leave you with is pulling the language from the job description, those key words, and implementing those into your previous work experiences or education, and kind of sprinkling those throughout the resume that you are submitting to the hiring manager to help align that language and that jargon. A lot of times hiring managers will use programs that have automated algorithms to identify keywords throughout a resume, and a lot of times they'll throw away a resume if they don't match a certain criteria. And so I like to pull the keywords off of the job posting and again, sprinkling them throughout the resume that I'm building that is going to be job specific. Thank you so much for tuning in this evening, and this has been a wonderful episode talking about how to craft an outstanding resume. Join me next week as I talk about different negotiation skills and how to land that high-paying job using those negotiation skills, which is one of my favorite topics to cover. And if you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel yet, please do. It's at Trial by Jenna Fire, and I'll see you all next week.